Let the word go
The
forth.
challenge, the opportunity to connect. The 1960s, a time of imagination and change, a time of anger and fear. The 1960s, a pioneering program called Challenge
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
that looked at our connections, our divisions, through the lens of shared values.
For something real.
60 years later, we examine our divisions, our connections, our shared pains and successes in a new program called Challenge 2.0. In last week's edition of Challenge 2.0, we began an investigation of the roots of anti-Semitism. This toxic blend of fear, superstition, and prejudice led last year to more than 2,000 acts of violence, destruction, and intimidation against American Jews. We'll conclude this exploration with a look at possible remedies as well as the costs in our toxic addiction to hate, Antisemitism Part Two. Well, we're deeply appreciative to again be able to welcome Rabbi Olivier Ben Chaim of Bet Aleph Meditative Synagogue. You were with us last week, and you are, I would definitely say, an authority on this issue of anti-Semitism, not only out of a matter of the impact on your faith community and communities, but also because you've seen, and you're a very articulate source, in terms of this is not confined to just one faith. It has effects that impact all of society. So Olivier, thank you again for joining us today.
I'm always honored.
We just finished talking about the Middle Ages in our last conversation. Flowing out of that is the period of the Inquisition, and you've stated that you view that as key to really understanding the development and the expansion, both in extent but also in the degree of anti-Semitism. Unpack that for us a little bit, if you would.
Yes, absolutely. I think the Inquisition is really a turning point in the unfolding of the history of anti-Semitism. So the church has had a problem with the Jewish people. The problem the church has had is that they couldn't understand why the people from which Jesus come wouldn't understand him to be the Messiah, and therefore wouldn't follow in Jesus' footsteps and become Christians themselves. This for them is really a problem they're really wrestling with. So the presence of the Jewish people is twofold for the church. One, they want to keep the Jews in poverty. They want to keep the Jews as second-class citizens so that they can prove to the rest of their world that they are the better religion now, that they are clearly the ruling religion. They call themselves the owners of the New Testament, as opposed to the Old Testament. Right? It's very that definition is anti-Semitic by definition, right? Because what's old is passé, what's old needs to be replaced, and Christianity came to replace Judaism. There's the sense of supersession, right? And yet the Jews are still here. And so through that history, the church is going to do all it can, whether by force, through violence, or through incentives, to convert the Jews. It's either convert them, expulse them, or kill them. And that happens throughout history. One of the three responses: convert them, kill them, expulse them. And in Spain specifically, they've done somewhat of a good job over the hundreds of years, and a lot of Jews have converted, all the way to 1492 and the expulsion and massacres. And also a mass of conversions, because it's either you convert or you die. And so Jews are unable to do otherwise. But there is a suspicion, obviously some of it is true, that Jews, though have converted, still practice Judaism in secret. There are the secret Jews. But there are Jews who really kind of embrace Christianity. Once they convert, some of them just even become priests in the church, in the local churches. Some of them, rise up through the rank of the Catholic Church. And so the church is looking at what's going on with those Jews that they finally were able to convert, that are now part of the church. And the Jews, because now they've converted and they're Christians, they also now have access, political access, financial access, all of those places that as Jews they were restricted from. Now they participate, and so some Jews actually really become wealthy. Some Jews participate in all aspects of political and religious life in those new open aspect of society. And so the church is really concerned that there is now this invasion of Jews inside the church. And therefore comes the Inquisition, the need to purify the church and to express from the church all of those non-Christian elements. And so they devised this new concept that the Jews are not just a religion. Because if they're a religion, they already converted, then there shouldn't be any problem. Why should you want to, by force, remove those Jews now from the church? And they start to talk about the Jews not as a religion, but as something in their blood. So there's a huge shift there, is that the Jews, even converted, are still Jews. Why are they still Jews if they're converted? Because they're Jewish by blood. There's something in the blood that is not convertible. And that is a radical shift in how to apprehend Jews. Judaism is not just a religion now, it's a race. We don't have that word yet, but if it's your blood, then it's in your body. You cannot escape it. You can convert to whatever religion you want, you're still Jewish. That's new in the world. That's a new form of hatred towards the Jewish people that is now part of their very being, not what the religion they follow. And that's, for me, is the shift that is going to usher in now a different kind of Jewish hatred. The Jew now is not just a people who follow a certain kind of religion. The Jew is a race. The Jew is a physical identity. It's a bloodline. And that's, for me, is a huge turning point that is going to lead down all the way to the gas chambers.
And we're going to explore that further, but
Sure.
as we begin to see some of these monarchies in whatever European country begin to crumble and fall, and Russia springs to mind in
Sure.
particular, there was again this decided effort to go ahead and pinpoint the Jews as the problem behind the change that was occurring then. Maybe just briefly give us an overview of what was going on in Russia and how that would spread to other countries as well.
Russia is a very fascinating case. I mean, if in this moment where we're talking about Zionism, you cannot not include Tsarist Russia if you want to understand the Zionist movement. The Tsars have had a great hatred for their Jewish people throughout their history. They conquer Eastern Europe. And with that, in the conquering of Eastern Europe, millions of Jews fall into their empire. And what they do is that they gather all the Jews into what's called the Pale of Settlement, which is their westernmost frontier of the empire, which today is like from Poland all the way down to Ukraine, which is why you have a lot of Jews in Poland and a lot of Jews in Ukraine, to this day in Ukraine actually. And so they create this immense ghetto, if you want. And this is where you're going to have, all the stories we know. If we've watched Fiddler on the Roof, the Cossacks or the Tsarist armies coming in and going into the Jewish villages and towns and murdering Jews. It would take us another 3 hours just to name all the reasons why. The Tsar is also seeking, as history seems to repeat itself, to destabilize the Western world. As history seems to be repeating itself now with a new Tsar in Russia. And the way he understands this could happen is because of anti-Semitism integrated in his own being, is that if you disrupt the Jews of Western civilization, because the Jews are so powerful, then you will disrupt the Western world, which will make them, more prone to your advances, whatever your plan was. And so the secret services of the Tsar write this completely manufactured conspiracy theory book called The Protocol of the Elders of Zion, which is one of the most devastating books that ever was written as far as propagating anti-Semitism. The book is about an imagined meeting of all the great Jewish leadership and minds of the time who had plotted to take over the world. The Jews were going to take over the world by all means, they had at their disposition. And so the book is all about that meeting, and the protocols of that meeting. And they disseminated this book, printed in all kinds of languages, in every language possible, and disseminated it around all of the Western world. And eventually, actually, it makes its way to Islam as well. And it's going to be one of the seeds of Muslim anti-Semitism, in fact. And that happens in the early 1900s. So it's about 130 years old. And it's a devastating book. I mean, it's going to be amplified. It's going to be, one of the ones who bring it to the United States, for example, is Henry Ford of the Ford Motor Company, who has passages of the book printed in the Dearborn newspaper. And that newspaper was available in all the car dealerships all over the nation. And that's how he started to disseminate the rabidly anti-Semitic Tsarist propaganda of the protocol.
It was also the source of a lot of horrific caricatures of individuals, too.
So all the caricatures that Nazism glom onto, a lot of that, and a lot of their ideology is also coming from that horrendous piece of propaganda.
Tell us a little bit about how that's persisted to this day in the United States.
That's also a difficult question. I think the period you're talking about, the early 1900s, 1920s specifically. I mean, you mentioned how the Nazis' leadership came to America to learn from America. One of the things they learned from America is the whole theory of the eugenics as well. And Hitler bragged about he's getting this notion of the purification of the race, in fact, and what you could do about that from the practices of the eugenics here in America, in some of the states of our nation back in the early 1900s. So yeah, there's America, and unfortunately inspires a lot of that. I think America anti-Semitism really takes shape in a very difficult way for the Jews in the 1920s, where there is this sense that we need to close the borders. Again, history repeats itself, it seems. We need to close, to restrict the coming of Jews into our country, and they are repeating laws that are passed in Washington to farther and farther and further close the doors of America to Jewish immigration at the time where we're talking about the most outrageous and most brutal massacres of Jews in Europe. The early 1900s were just devastating for Jews. And again, if we're talking about the history of Zionism, that is also why we have so many Jewish refugees coming and trying to find refuge with 2 suitcases and a toothbrush back in Mandate Palestine under the British rule at the time. So what happens is that at the worst time in Jewish history, America closes its doors, and as the events in Europe progress towards Nazism and then the war and then the concentration and extermination camp, America has completely sealed its borders to immigration, Jewish immigration. So to me, that's the worst, really, expression of anti-Semitism here. We know of stories of escapees, of Jewish refugees that barely eked their way out of Germany or out of Europe before the war, or before the massacres. came to Cuba, came to the shore away from Florida, and the U.S. government just turns them around, turns the ships back to Germany, to Hamburg, and hundreds and hundreds of Jews are killed in those concentration camps from the refusal of America to take them as refugees. Some really horrendous stories.
As we talk about anti-Semitism in the United States and how it developed and was expressed during that era, as we move forward to more or less contemporary times, I think it used to be the sense that when people talked about anti-Semitism, they thought of the political right. They thought of neo-Nazi groups, white Christian nationalists, etc. The march in Charlottesville, Virginia, the shootings at synagogues. I think the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh was one that comes to mind, and slogans like "Jews will not replace us," etc. But you argue that is definitely an issue, but it doesn't just exist on the political right. Describe that for us a little bit.
Sure. Yes, absolutely. So what's going on in the political right is, I don't want to be glib about it, but it's kind of a known entity as far as Jews are concerned. The neo-Nazis, you have to be a member of the group, you have to have the tattoos, you have to be on the dark web. Like, there are pointers that says, okay, there's this group mentality there of people who are neo-Nazis. Like, when you say neo-Nazis, you already understand, you have a picture in your mind of what a neo-Nazi looks like. It might not look like it's in your mind, but you can tell, okay, that, if I see a neo-Nazi group on the streets, I know to find a different direction wherever I was going, because it's a known entity. I can pinpoint it, and I can try and fight it. What we're seeing exploding on the scene for the last 8 months now is the anti-Semitism on the left. And that is much more challenging, especially for us who live in very deep blue states, because now it's not our neighbors. So, I mentioned in the first session what's happening to Jews in their personal lives here in Seattle, for example. And so this is happening literally on our streets, with our neighbors. It's not, nobody has a tattoo that says I'm an anti-Semite, and it's insidious. They might not even know that some of their actions are anti-Semitic. They might not even know that to blame one Jew for the entirety of or for the perceived ills of Israel is the quintessential act of racism. To blame one for the whole. You wouldn't do that to a black person or to an Asian person. You would never do that to another minority. You would never say, well, because your people over there acts this way, therefore you are also like them. Right? And that's, in fact, unconsciously what people are doing. They're lumping their neighbors, the member of their women's group, with whatever they perceive Israel doing on the other side of the planet. So that's the danger to me. It's like we are starting to fear. We're walking in the streets with my kippah on my head. I'm more aware. When I engage with a health professional, when I engage with the cashier at the register, I don't know how I'm going to be perceived. I don't know what I have to really be mindful of people's reactions to my presence. But we also know, like just last week, there was an article about how, I think it was in California, if I'm not mistaken, an association of psychotherapists, with hundreds of members, publicize to their website and on the internet a list of all the Jewish psychotherapists in their group, telling people not to become patients of them.
Really?
So you see, this to me is blatantly anti-Semitic. When you single out a group of health professionals that were part of your association, professional association, and urge people not to go to these Zionists, where you have no idea if any one of those therapists is or isn't the Zionist, if they believe in the right of the state of Israel to exist or not. You have no idea of their political, lineages, but then you out them to the world, and we see that all the time. We see that everywhere. People lose jobs. People don't get jobs, and so because it's under the radar, right? You can never really accuse anyone for the anti-Semitism that is already happening and growing.
Isn't it de facto a signing of the Star of David that we saw during the Nazi era?
Yes.
Electronically, as opposed to something on their clothes.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm reading articles about what's going on in the dating app world. I know we could smile at that, but it's becoming on some of the dating apps, local dating apps or national dating apps, like people are asking to others who might, on their picture look Jewish or might have what could be a Jewish name. Are you a Zionist? Like, it's part of the conversation. And if you say, well, I believe in the existence of the state of Israel, you are in trouble in those dating apps. So it's like the way I characterize it is, in Nazi Germany in the early 30s, before things turned really for the worse, there were what's called the laws of Nuremberg. The Nazis had the laws of Nuremberg by which step by step, they pushed the Jews out of the socio-economic of participating in the socio-economic life of Germany. You couldn't have your profession, and then they started to tag the Jewish stores with the Star of David. You don't go shop there. Speaking of dating apps, you couldn't have a relationship with a Jew, an intimate relationship. You were persona non grata if, as a non-Jew, you had a relationship with a Jew. So we live in an era where you don't need the laws written in as state laws to start to discriminate and exclude Jews from the social economic context in which we exist. It's happening under the radar thanks to social media, thanks to the internet, and thanks to people who feel that every American Jew is a Zionist, whatever that means, if you disagree with what Zionist is.
And you're also conflating a faith belief, a cultural identity, with support for a government that currently is in power. And
absolutely, it's vast ignorance, which is what anti-Semitism feeds upon.
I think for a lot of people watching this, they're going to say, well, what could we do to counter some of this narrative that we hear or see being played out in public places or in private places, such as on the internet? What would you ask them to do?
To me, as we unfortunately, I think, are seeing history repeating itself, I believe there's a lot of similarities between this moment in Western civilization and the 1930s. And I'm very concerned and disturbed about that. But I think as then, what I would ask all of us to do, including all of us, is to work tirelessly to secure and strengthen the institutions of democracy, to secure and strengthen what our country, specifically here in America, was created based on our values, our political values, our moral values, and I'm talking about tolerance, values of tolerance that are the bedrock of our community, of our nation, values of pluralism, values of freedom, values of embrace and inclusivity, the tolerance of all religions, of all people, no matter where they came from, no matter the language they speak. Historically, the Jews have been the canary in the coal mine of soon-to-be defunct democracies. Jews thrive in democracies. And democracies thrive when the Jews are able to contribute as well, as all other people are able to contribute. When the Jews are in danger, again, they are the canary in the coal mine of the dangers and the fragility of democracy. And I think we are in that historical moment here in America, and I think in the Western world, where democracies are teetering on a very abrupt precipice. That would be the only thing that I could ask anyone, is to fight and strengthen our democratic institutions and democracy at home, and to fight for it tooth and nail.
Olivier, thank you so much for spending time with us and unpacking this for us and giving us new sensitivity in terms of the reach in history and how we see it playing out. This obviously would have deserved much more time.
Of course.
But thank you so much for sharing of your time and attention, and our best to you and to your synagogue members.
Thank you.
And hopefully we will move through to the other side.
We will.
So thank you so much, Olivier, and thank you, each of you, for joining us on this edition of Challenge 2.0. Thank you very much. If you've enjoyed this program, found the conversations informative, interesting, and thought-provoking, and the visions of people from different backgrounds, faiths, or wisdom traditions inspiring, people who can disagree without being disagreeable and respect the essential human dignity of all, perhaps consider supporting our organization with a contribution. Your donation will not only support this program, but also the broader work of our nonprofit charitable organization, Paths to Understanding. Thank you.